Good afternoon and welcome to the ROI of an MBA Is It Worth It panel. It's a student panel. My name is Meredith Dennis and I am a counselor at Stratus Admissions. I went to Northwestern undergrad. I worked at Marvel Comics and then I went to NYU for my MBA. I spent 15 years working in investment banking. In mergers and acquisitions, and I also did leveraged finance. Upon leaving, I founded a tech company called Project Eve that reached about 17 million women monthly, and I am currently the COO of a global financial search firm named Harrison Rush that specializes in private equity and investment banking placements. So welcome. I'd like to introduce the panel right now. Hattie, would you mind introducing yourself? It would also be wonderful if you could give us a little bit about where you went to school, what you're doing now, and where you're currently located.
Yes, happy to. Hi, everyone. My name is Hattie Berry. I am here to represent UC Berkeley Haas. I did undergrad at Georgetown University, and then worked a lot in international development space, working for USAID contractors, and then decided that I really wanted to see how the private sector could be leveraged to deepen social impact. So decided to pursue an MBA at Haas, where I was focusing on social entrepreneurship. And I ended up then joining short-term a social impact consulting firm, but most recently I was working for the past 2 years for Zipline, which is a startup that uses drones to deliver medical commodities in Rwanda, Ghana, and as of this year in the US as well, in North Carolina, and through a partnership with Walmart. Terrific. And I'm joining this panel from Abidjan, Ivory Coast.
Thank you. Mohammed, would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Sure. Thanks, Meredith. My name is Mohammed. I am here representing Ross. I completed my MBA there in 2014. My undergraduate was from Michigan State. I worked in finance and operations and manufacturing for about 8 years before going back to school. Upon graduating, I joined Apple in their support organization, working in commercial contracts and business operations, where you work California hours, then you work China hours. So if you like having any semblance of a life, that's not the place to be, but it is exciting and you get to work on a lot of cool stuff. Currently, I'm at VMware working in support operations, leading the readiness endeavors for a lot of the upcoming products.
Terrific. Manan, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Manan Puri. I'm an alumnus from Indian School of Business in India. I am dialing in from India, and prior to my MBA, I worked with a company called Standard & Poor's. I was there in private equity research. It was more a research support for private equity investors and suitors around that. I worked there for about 3.5 years and then did my MBA from ISB. Post that, I joined UBS in their leadership program and eventually ended up in a chief of staff business management role, which essentially means anything and everything which is not somebody else's problem is your problem. So led a few strategic initiatives and then switched industries, used the transferable skills to move to Mercer Consulting. Did a similar role there for about a couple of years and then started up my own admissions consulting firm by the name of Strategy for GMAT. And looking forward to the sessions and the discussions.
Wonderful. Welcome. Maeve, can you introduce yourself as well, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Maeve McGilloway. I went to University of Virginia, Darden School of Business, class of 2017. Prior to business school, I went to Middlebury College, a liberal arts school in Vermont. So that was part of my decision to go back to business school, which I'm sure we'll touch on. And after college, I worked at JP Morgan Chase for 5 years in a variety of financial services roles and rotational programs. I went back to Darden with the goal to kind of jump into consulting and kind of broaden my industry and sector exposure. So I joined Deloitte Consulting after business school, where I've worked for the past 3 years. And then I'm actually about to transition into private equity in a few weeks and to start a new role and venture in my career. excited to meet you all.
Wonderful. Thank you all for introducing yourself, and thank you all for attending the panel. For the first question I'm going to put on the screen right now, my first question is, an MBA is a significant investment, both in time and money. Can you talk briefly about the major impact the education has had on your life? Would any of you like to go first? I am going to say, May, you go first.
Sure thing. So there's a couple things about my MBA experience, or the impact of the education. So like I mentioned in my introduction, so personally, I went to a liberal arts college and undergrad. So I had an economics background, but I didn't really have the skills in finance and accounting that I thought I needed in my future endeavors. So very tactically, the classroom, certain classes, I just needed to augment my skill set. But secondly, speaking specifically maybe to Darden and HBS and a few other schools, the case method is somewhere that I really exhibited, from just, pushing your ideas in the classroom, talking through them, being challenged by your classmates. It was kind of exhibiting a leadership skill in the classroom and practicing it out in a safe space that I really didn't have in the workplace. And then the last kind of educational piece that I had that I benefited from was just leadership experiences at business school. So whether you're leading clubs or workshops or offsites or whatever it may be, there's a ton of leadership potential for you to, again, practice kind of those leadership components in a safe space outside of the work context, and then practice those in the real world post-graduation.
Terrific. Does anyone have anything else to add? I thought Hattie might have something to add as well. I think I saw you kind of chime up. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm also, my door blew open. And since I live in Vermont, I'm just going to close it because I have goats. So please start. I'm just going to run and close my door.
No problem. I'll be brief. I would say, for me, I always think back to one major thing. I think for me, school helped me reframe the way I think about myself, what I'm able to do. It was to be in a space where you could just allow yourself to dream really big and let go of any fear and try to project yourself in the future. So if you had no fear, what would you do? And really have the room to test it out and go after different things in the classroom or outside the classroom. And for me, that's a mental shift that really remained with me even after business school. Anything that comes my way, I just approach it with the mentality that I can do it, I can learn it, I can do whatever I want to do if I actually apply myself to it.
Wonderful. Manan or Muhammad, do you have anything to add as well?
So I think in terms of two takeaways, I would say from my MBA, one, and which people always talk about, is that network, which was there during the time, and then what you have afterwards. And this is not a tangible impact. It has a lot of impact on the perspectives of how you see things, how you see problems. In my class, for example, I had a musician who had worked with the top musician in the country. I also had somebody from the Indian Army. He had somebody who was an MBBS doctor, and then the regular run-of-the-mill folks like us from private equity, investment banking, and financial services. So it was a good blend, which when you approach problems outside of the MBA environment, you realize, okay, maybe prior to MBA, this is what I would have done, and now I'm doing things differently. I think that was one very important key takeaway for me. The other, obviously, is the brand, which at least you can cash in, so to speak, for the first 4 or 5 years. Maybe not beyond that, but initially it is a foot in the door. You always, somebody hears about your education background, it does tend to have an impact on whatever you're having a conversation with afterwards. So it is a foot in the door, and those are the two things which broadly come to mind, apart from case-based learning, etc., which is, I think, there for all top MBA programs.
Thank you so much. We have another student ambassador who's joined, Prakriti. I'm so sorry, I mispronounced your name, but perhaps you can take a minute and introduce yourself and a bit about your background, because I want to welcome you to our roundtable discussion right now.
Yeah, I really apologize for being late. I didn't realize this was Chrome supported, so there was a bit of a mess up there. Regardless, so this is Prakriti. I studied at Duck Business School in Dartmouth, and I graduated in 2018. Since then, I was working with a hedge fund, and then I sort of like got to a point where I wanted to get back into social impact. That's what I was doing before MBA. So I am right now the COO of Teach for Vietnam.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, welcome to our panel. We're going to move on to the next question. And let's see if that works. And the question is, how has an MBA had an impact on your career? And Muhammad, I'm going to target you first because you got off easy on the last question. So if you wouldn't mind taking this one. So how has an MBA impacted your career? Maybe you could take the first stab at this.
Sure, thanks. Most people, when they're thinking about the MBA, as you heard when people did their intros, are considering a pivot, right? You want to change paths. And the MBA is viewed as the bridge to change paths. So when I was working in finance and operations and manufacturing, my last role was in operations. I was finally on the revenue side. Before that, all my roles were in the corporate side, just expense. So when you get to touch the revenue side, you actually get to work on more. Your ability to have impact is much higher. You have more levers you can pull. So I wanted to move to more operation-focused roles. And so I used the MBA as that sort of stepping stone to do that. I focus on operation classes, I focus on operation internships, and ultimately ended up with an operations role within Apple. A lot of the knowledge you might not actually have to transfer. Your focus, again, is on pivoting from one thing to another and using the MBA as that stepping stone.
Thank you. And Prakriti, maybe I can just throw you into the fire and you can take a stab at this question as well. Would you mind terribly? So I just posted it again. How has an MBA had an impact on your career?
Sure. So I think with respect to me, why I joined the MBA was because I really did not have a lot of the skills, abilities, and knowledge that is required to really run an organization as a quote unquote leader. So I had a basic engineering degree, and then post that I was with Teach for India. So I think in terms of just like financial acumen, in terms of like strategic thinking, things like that, just did not have exposure to it. So that was the primary reason why I did the MBA. And it worked out really well for me because I sort of got an opportunity to develop that and then quickly pivot into like leadership roles and start implementing some of those things. So I feel for me, what would have probably taken me 5 or 6 years, that got shortened to like 2 to 3 years. So that's the difference it's made personally for me. Yeah.
Maeve, Hadi, do you have anything to add? Manan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so my idea of getting into an MBA program was to get into private equity. And first month I realized, okay, that's not my cup of tea. I can't get in, not enough jobs. And then the kind of roles that I was looking at are more quote unquote general management roles, for which you essentially need a skill or a trait to work across different levels, talk the same language with the finance guys, with the operations guys, sales guys, etc. And that's where MBA really helped me in terms of getting the basics right for all the support functions and all the drivers of a business. I think outside of that, it was more again, in terms of the kind of projects that you did, you multitask all the time, and it has had a great impact in terms of the kind of roles that I did in future and now in my current role as well. So which effectively is because of the fact that yes, I am a graduate from a top B school. So I think it was a pivot, it was a skill change, it was a mindset change overall, I guess.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else to add before I move on to the next question? No. Great. So it is hard to put a price tag on the value of the MBA network. So how has this network you have had an impact on your career and life? And I'm going to have Hattie answer this first, please, if you don't mind.
Not at all. I think in my case, and when it comes to Haas, I think the network had an impact on me even before I started Haas, because the Hassie who interviewed me happened to be in the space of social impact and education. I was really happy to introduce me when I got into another classmate of hers who had a social enterprise in Ghana at the time. So really looked me in that network of people at Haas who were in that space. And even my job at Zipline, the reason why I ended up at Zipline is because a classmate of mine, the class below, had a friend who was part of the business development team and was really kind enough to make an introduction, which allowed me to learn about the role, about the company, and then made me comfortable about applying to join like a drone startup when I don't have a background in engineering. So I have found the network extremely valuable. It's really hard to put a value to this, both before, during my time at Haas, and after, and even to this day. For example, right now I am working with friends on an idea around money transfer and cryptocurrency, but in the context of Africa. And I just remember that there's this company out of Kenya called BPesa, which is one of the few players on continent that use cryptocurrency. And the CEO and co-founder was a Hassie. And I reached out to her maybe 3 weeks ago, and she replied right away, happy to talk to me about her experience running that company. And it doesn't have to lead to anything, and it doesn't have to bring anything to her, but there's this eagerness and willingness to share knowledge and give time to people who are part of your program. And that's really, really, really valuable.
Maeve, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I knew getting an MBA, I was going to acquire the school's broader network, both the MBA and for me, both the undergrad. And my network, I was purposely looking at geographies that were kind of outside my network. So I grew up in the Northeast and was looking for schools kind of outside that I didn't already have a network. But the one thing that I really, I guess my business school experience was the network while I was at school. So the 2 years and just getting involved in the campus and the community and leadership roles, I can honestly say of 350 people I graduated, 80% of them, I know what they're doing, I know where they're living, I kind of have a general pulse of my classmates. And for me, that level of familiarity with your classmates, with your 2-year network is a level and a degree that I wasn't aware of and didn't really appreciate in my undergrad experience. And so now it's not just the cold call, to a random classmate, it's a catch up. And I think that's a very different conversation as you recruit. And having just gone through the recruiting process myself, it was informal catch ups with good friends, not just, former classmates that I loosely knew. And for me, that made all the difference.
Thank you. I saw Prakriti, you were shaking your head and nodding in agreement. Perhaps you have something that you'd like to add?
Nothing drastically different, similar to what Maeve was talking about. Tuck is also such a small group of tight-knit individuals, so it evokes probably the same feeling in me, so which is why I was nodding my head. But yeah, otherwise, alumni has always been super helpful in terms of not just recruiting, but also like promoting you in terms of visibility, just like making sure, you have an understanding of different things. So I've especially found them to be super helpful.
Wonderful. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to add before I move on to the next question? It's looking like it's a no. Okay. So the next question that I have is the $1 million question. Was it worth it? And Muhammad, would you like to answer first? So there's really, there's nowhere to hide because all I see is the 6 faces staring back.
I'm in a dungeon.
Would you mind answering this first?
I'm already in a dungeon basement, so there's no escaping it as it is. So I'm going to be contrarian here.
No escape from the question.
No
Staring at everybody's face on this question. Yeah.
So I'll be contrarian.
So is it
contrarian here. Is an MBA worth it, right? If you look at the numbers, if you look at Financial Times, yeah, it's very expensive. You're losing income. If you're not getting financial aid, you're paying to breathe. If you're doing your MBA, like you're not paying. You're not being paid. You're paying to breathe. So that's the way to look at it. A lot of people come into the MBA and it's a 2-year vacation, right? So you have sponsored students, you have people that have financial aid, you have people that are taking out loans. So everyone's incoming circumstances vary greatly. But if you come in having an idea of what you want and being flexible, you will be very satisfied with the outcome. Like not everyone has a huge pay increase, not everyone gets their dream career, but it opens a lot of doors and it gives you opportunities to, as mentioned earlier, to have a risk-free environment to try things out, which you don't have. After you finish undergrad, everything becomes very, very risky in life. And so was it worth it? Yeah, I got to do a lot of cases. I got to work on a lot of things. I got to experience things. I got to work with oh, by the way, if your school has an accelerator or an incubator, highly recommend you get involved with it because you meet some engineering undergrads who have really cool ideas. But you are the master of the helm of what you want to get out of it. So if you take advantage of your time, you don't suffer too much FOMO, you'll do great. If you're constantly worried about missing out on things, you'll be sad.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else that they would like to add?
Yeah, I think in general for me as well, you would have guessed it was definitely worth it. And to Mohammad's point, it is totally about you in terms of what you intend to get out of an MBA. More importantly, why you want to get into an MBA. It's not the tag. It's not just another activity that you undertake. It's a big decision. It's a life-changing decision. So before getting in, you should know what you want to do 2 years or 1 year down the line in case of 1-year MBA programs. And then at the MBA, I usually give an example. It's like a huge buffet. You eat what you can and what you want as per your appetite. And, like Mohammed said, don't get into FOMO because it's your life and your journey at the end of the day.
Thank you. So we had a couple of questions come in. We have about 169 people who are currently watching us. So I want to take some of their questions as well. One of the big ones that came in is, what would be a person profile who you would not recommend getting an MBA? Is there anyone that you can think of? I know, if especially in this day and age in financial services, analyst promotes to associate in investment banking. There's no point in getting an MBA. That period where you've already transitioned and gotten the 3rd-year analyst promote, there's no point in going back. You can't really retrack into private equity with an MBA. You don't need it. Another circumstance that I can think of is CFA level 3. It's almost comparable to an MBA. And so, those are two kind of off the top of my head where I would scratch my head and say, oh, you're already a CFA level 3, you're already an analyst promote, and you want to stay in finance, you're not really pivoting your career. Perhaps you want to do, there's another direction you want to go in, or you can save your money or just utilize the time at work. Those are two. Does anyone have any other examples that they can think of where an MBA may not be the best path forward?
This might be, so I was going to say all the financial services examples of someone with that background. So, and this might be contrarian, but personally, I think be thoughtful about your work experience leading up to the MBA. So this is less around a profile, but more around a person. Because you forget once you enter the MBA, it's a general equalizer. So like everyone in my class went to Darden. We were all the same brand. And then it fell back to kind of what I had done beforehand. And I know a lot of schools and are positioning to 2+2 programs and something of that sort. But I do think a lot of your experience before the business school process will be helpful with recruiting and in the classroom. And sometimes, people are so quick to jump into business school without the leadership experience that they might need to really get the most out of their MBA.
Do any of you have anything else that you want to add?
I think few other profiles which maybe don't need an MBA is the ones where you want to grow in a specialized field. For example, analytics. Rather than getting after an undergrad degree and some experience, go for an MS in analytics rather than an MBA. So MBA I would recommend for people who want beyond that SME tag. It's something beyond that is something we should go for. Apart from that, if you're looking for drastically changing the entire set of industries that you're into, say financial services for 10 years or 8 years, and then you want to get into sales, branding, etc., it's difficult to do that. So those are the kind of profiles and kind of goals. For more importantly, I would not recommend even trying, because this is unrealistic. You probably will get rejected, or you'll be at the course and realize, okay, you don't know where to go.
So here's another question that's come up from our audience. Given the strict regulations on visas for international students in the US, is it wise to opt for an MBA in the US? And what I think that person is referring to is the limitation on H-1Bs right now. And so have you noticed I know at least in my everyday experience, I know several of the banks, particularly the elite boutiques in the bulge bracket, have backed off recruiting H-1Bs and said, we can't at this time accept H-1B candidates. So I think the big question is, what is your thought on visa and the visa situation and the MBA in the US? Is it worth it? Should they look at schools outside the US? Do you think this is a long-term issue or a short-term? And so this one, I think I'm going to, Manan, would you mind taking this, because you're in India? Most of the questions that I get regarding H-1Bs are definitely folks from India, but they're also predominantly from Europe as well. And so you may have a bit more insight into this. I'm interested to hear your answer.
Yeah. So I think by and large, the people that I'm interacting with are from Europe and Asia. And people are worried, to be honest, applying to US. The first doubt is there is a visa issue. I might not get a job. I might not be able to work there. And then what I'm seeing is a gradual eastward movement of applications. Few stats I was reading, and in my own experience as well, people are more keen to apply to Canadian schools as well as schools in Asia like NUS, NTU, HKUST, and ISB. So definitely that has had an impact in terms of the perception. Now, once you get in, it I think is more about the firm that you're a part of, and the kind of rapport that you share and what you add. So H-1B, in my experience and what I've seen with my employers and as well as people, is it is more about the firm who's sponsoring you as well, how keen they are and how important they feel, how important they are able to justify the entire experience that way. But by and large, this has added a lot of uncertainty. At least I am seeing a dip in applications to even the top schools in the US, barring a couple of ones which have waived off the GMAT requirement right now. But there is an uncertainty and probably requires a lot more clarification in general.
Has anybody else have anything to say on H-1Bs and that issue?
So I say this with no offense to Manan and Prakriti, but I say this with full offense to the Indian tech companies. They have figured out how to get, so if anyone wants to go, this is all public information, but 80% of H-1Bs are collected by 7 Indian consulting and tech firms. Okay, that tells you it's not really a lottery. it's a game, and these 8 firms play it very, very, very well. And so if you're concerned with that and the optics of the H-1B process, that's what you're up against, right? For all the other geographies outside of India and China, your ability to obtain sponsorship are much higher, and that leads to residency. For folks who were born in the Indian subcontinent or China, your chances are generally much lower and your runways are much longer. It's just the politics of today. But that being said, for the main benefit of the American MBA is access to the MBA markets. You can look up all the schools, and where their pipelines for recruiting tend to be very geographically specific and usually industry focused. So for example, if you go down to the South or like Texas or Georgia, the jobs that most people go will be in those areas, right? So if you're focused on finance, UK is a good market, France is a good market, Switzerland's a good market. So you don't have to be dependent on the MBAs to achieve your goals. It's, or I should say an American, a US-based MBA to achieve your goals, because the ability to obtain residency is becoming a little bit harder in general.
I'm also seeing the same going on with TN visas. I'm seeing a pullback in TN visas and the ability of firms to accept TN visas or spousal visas as well, which has always been, TN visas were particularly easy from Canada. Spousal visas were always easy as well. And over the last 6 to 7 months, I'm seeing a pullback as well. That being said, I think things may change with the election and with the end of the year. And so, at least from my perspective, I think a US MBA is always going to be a valuable commodity because of the opportunities within the United States. It may not be exactly the same in 2 years as the situation now. Things may open up, but the world may actually change. So I wouldn't say don't apply to a US MBA, because you can't immediately get a job right now, because within the next 3 weeks, things may change. Within the next 2 years, things may change. It's a dynamic and iterative process. It's a dynamic work market, and we see changes every day, at least in the sectors that I work in. So here is, I have so many questions. I'm just trying to pull up another interesting one. So here's an interesting question that was, it's really about age and work experience. So, how much work experience is too much work experience to get an MBA? Is age an issue, or is it really experience? So I have somebody here who's 36 and they want to know, is it worth it to get an MBA? And really what I think they're asking is, if you're 36 and you have a tremendous amount of work experience, is it still worth it to get an MBA? And I'll turn that over to Maeve.
So I can't answer being 36 and getting an MBA. I do think it is kind of the level of work experience and leadership you're getting in your current role. I mean, independent of if you want to make a pivot. If you want to make a pivot, like Muhammad mentioned, an MBA is a great vehicle to do so, regardless of age, personally. But I do think the level of leadership experience that you're getting in your job should be kind of a gauge or a proxy for if the MBA is worth it. So I was, an associate in financial services. I was managing very small teams, but I didn't kind of have the leadership that I was managing a P&L, managing larger teams, kind of those true strategic managerial qualities. So for me, my prior work experience made a lot of sense to make that pivot. So I'd say, agnostic of age, look at what you're doing and kind of what leadership opportunities you have and evaluate those, and then what you'll gain from the MBA.
I agree. Does anyone have anything else to say?
So I was on the older age, as when I went back, I was 30. There was only, I think, 4 classmates older than me. The average age at that time was about 26. And everyone was there for different reasons, right? And so the older folks had a much narrower focus. They knew what they wanted. So if you are older but you have that focus, then there's no downside, right? The younger crowd's the one that's trying to pivot, trying to make a big change, trying to do these things. The older crowd, typically they have a much better idea on the output or the outcome they're seeking. So I wouldn't shy away from it. I would just suggest that try to have that focus, because your ability to pivot in careers is it's not as open as someone who say is 26.
And I realize none of us are executive MBAs, right, Meredith? All of us are.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go. I don't think any of you were part-time MBAs or executive MBAs. I think, if you're a bit older, or not necessarily older, but have considerable work experience, two programs that you could potentially consider would be the executive MBA, or you consider a part-time MBA where you could continue working and attend school part-time to further your career, enhance your existing skill set, and facilitate a possible promotion within your existing organization. And MBA isn't always about pivoting. It's also about building skills that will make you a stronger employee as well. So we're
Meredith,
kind
can I
of
make one more plug there real quick?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll give a quick story. When I was going back, I actually explored all the opportunities. So I asked my employer for sponsorship. I asked for full-time sponsorship, for part-time sponsorship. I asked to get laid off. And finally, I took my leave of absence, which they can't say no to. So if you are looking to go back, you can hedge your risks as much as possible. There's no shame in hedging your personal exposure as you decide to go back, because if you've committed to going, then explore all the opportunities to minimize your exposed risk, because why take more risk than what you have to take?
Sounds good. I get this question a lot on my about it, more directed towards Manan. Is it worth going for a second MBA for someone who has already done a full-time MBA from an Indian premier business school?
Sorry, I lost the question in the middle. Maybe it was just
Sure,
my
here.
connection.
I can probably just show it. Is it worth going for a second MBA when somebody has already done a full-time MBA from a premier Indian business school?
Sure.
And as a
I
counselor,
think
I get this question a lot. So I'm interested to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah. So typically, even I also get it, and in cases where people are already having a top tier MBA from India, it is more about A, pivoting, B, working outside the country in a particular region, and then going for an MBA from a top college there, because ISB's brand name or IIM-MBA's brand name would not be as recognized in, say, if you want to work in Germany, for example, or work in London or any other place. So one is deciding upon why. Again, the principles of MBA will not change. It's more about why, and it's more about for people who are willing to shift outside the country and then working there. More importantly, I think it's about convincing the admissions committee in terms of why do you want to do a second MBA. If it was a tier 3, tier 4 B school, it becomes an easy one. But if it's already a tier 1 premier MBA, it becomes a lot more challenging to convince them. And the final bit is it should be at least 4 to 5 years after your first MBA, because you would obviously reap the benefits of that one and then go for a second MBA from school outside India for sure. Within India, I would definitely not recommend if it's a premier B school.
Okay, thank you. And so we're kind of bumping up against time here. And so I wanted to know if any of you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to tell the community that's watching. We have about 206 people right now that are currently watching. So is the MBA worth it? It's really, really expensive. Did you anything you want to leave in terms of thoughts to the
I think you were cutting out quite
I
a bit.
can call
Meredith, so
on
be
somebody
careful.
or
Your bandwidth spiking.
oh, I was. Yeah. I'm sorry. So it was really just, we're bumping up against time, and I wanted to know if anybody had any closing thoughts on, the ROI of an MBA. Is there anything that we haven't brought up that you feel you want to let the people know about? Any questions that we haven't really discussed that you think you want to leave in terms of a closing thought?
I think I just wanted to reinforce some of the points that were made around focus. I think the MBA is a great time to explore, but it's good to come in with an idea of what is it you want to do or get out of it. It could be they have 1 or 2 or 3 pass you're trying to test, but actively focus on really testing out whether or not it's a fit for you and really discarding early when you realize that's not what you want. And also there's also the effect of making sure that you remain true to yourself, because you can at some point also take on other people's ambitions that are not really yours. At least for me, I remember when I came in, I knew that I really wanted to explore entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. But the first semester, everyone that's going for consulting is deep into like prepping for the interviews and the case method. And there was a moment there where I was starting to do the same, not realizing that this was not at all my plan or ambition. So I had to have that personal check and come back to myself. It's like, yeah, okay, it might be a fun experience, something you should do, but ultimately this doesn't lead you to your goal and your path. So I would say really important to retain some form of focus and be very, very proactive about testing and checking out the things that you're going after.
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything else to say?
Sure. So I 3 points. One, obviously, to what Heidi mentioned, you have to know your journey and why you want to enter an MBA program. And second, I think a lot of people, and I was looking at the questions, they are measuring an ROI between your tuition fee and the immediate job that you get and the salary out of that. Yes, it's a good measure, the salary to debt ratio, or whatever it is. Think of this as an investment in a 25 to 30 year long career. Even if somebody who's 35, you still have almost 25 to 30 years to work in this day and age. So think of that as an investment which will reap results financially and non-financially as well. The self-actualization part is there almost for everybody, I think. So make sure you weigh in on that in terms of this. The other bit is, I think I would recommend everybody thinking about an MBA, and in some cases applying to a B school as well, to know yourself better, because that admissions process itself is eye-opening. You basically relook at your entire life, a panoramic view that you have, and you end up knowing yourself better regardless of the outcome, whether you go for it or not, whether you get admitted or not. So at least thinking about it at critical junctures in your career is definitely advisable. You get to know yourself better, you get to know your goals better in any case. So those would be my closing comments.
Thank you. And I just want to add one thing. An MBA is not a place, or business school is not a place to find yourself or figure out what you want to do. It is not a time for great exploration. It is a time to put your plan in motion and get from point A to point B. If you don't know where point B is before you go to business school, I would highly recommend that you not go to business school until you figure out where you want to go after business school. It's like taking a bus and not telling them where you want to stop. You're just going to be sitting on the bus. You've paid for the ticket, and you're not actually ever going to get to the destination that you want to get to. So, if nothing else, I think it's really important that you know exactly what you want. And if you can figure out exactly what That concludes our panel of ROI of an MBA. Is it worth it? I wanted to thank all our student ambassadors and former MBA students who have joined us today to speak. Prakriti, Maeve, Manan, Muhammad, and Hadi, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I think the people on the call really appreciate your time as well. Have a nice day, all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.